The first scratch was a whisper against the roar of the storm, a sound so faint I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. I was huddled by the fire, the flames my only companions in the deep, consuming silence of the mountain. 3 years, 3 long years since I had last heard a voice that wasn't my own echo back from these wooden walls. I called this isolation a penance, a necessary exile to keep the world safe from the tragedy that followed me. My name is Alara, and this cabin, buried deep in the wilderness where no map would ever lead, is my sanctuary and my prison. The wind screamed like a living thing, hurling fistfuls of snow against the shutters. The entire structure groaned, a weary old beast bearing the weight of the winter. I stirred the thin broth in my pot, my stomach clenching with a familiar, hollow ache. This blizzard was different. It felt angry, purposeful, as if it had been sent to finally tear my fragile world apart. Then the sound came again. Not a whisper this time, but a desperate, scraping drag against the heavy oak door. My blood ran cold, colder than the ice forming on the window pane. My spoon clattered against the pot, the noise unnaturally loud in the small space. Nothing ever came here. That was the point. No trappers, no wanderers, no wolves. Especially no wolves. My heart began a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat, a small cloud of panic in the frigid air. Every instinct, honed by years of survival and fear, screamed at me to stay silent, to bank the fire, to become invisible. But a low, pained whine cut through the storm's fury, a sound of pure animal distress that struck a chord deep within my soul. It was a sound I knew too well. It was the sound of a creature giving up. I was a healer before I was an outcast. My grandmother's voice, warm and firm, surfaced from the depths of my memory. Your hands hold a gift, Alara. To ignore a cry for help is to reject the moon's blessing. But my blessing had curdled into a curse. My touch brought death, not life. The scratching turned into a heavy, rhythmic thud. Thump, thump, thump. It was a battering ram of desperation. Something big was out there, something powerful, brought to its knees by the storm. Tremors racked my body as I forced my feet to move. I crept toward the door, my hand hovering over the rough, splintered wood. The cold that seeped through the cracks felt like a warning. Don't do it. Stay safe. Stay alone. But the memory of 2 graves dug in quick succession flashed behind my eyes. The weight of the accusations, the venom in the word cursed. I had run away to prevent more death, but was letting death happen at my doorstep any better? My fingers pale and shaking closed around the cold iron bolt. The metal screeched as I slid it back, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the night. I took a step back, bracing myself. The door exploded inward. A torrent of snow and freezing wind slammed into me, stealing my breath. And with the storm came the wolves. They poured into my cabin, a flood of white fur and primal power. They were enormous, each one a creature of myth, their shoulders as high as my waist, their paws the size of my hands. Their fur, the color of fresh snow, seemed to glow with an unearthly light in the fire's dim dance. I stumbled back until the rough-hewn wall dug into my spine, trapping me. My heart hammered so violently I felt lightheaded. There were so many of them, their massive bodies filling every inch of space. Their heat and their wild, snowy scent overwhelmed my senses. I counted them as my vision swam. 12 giant wolves now stood in my home, and they were all looking at me. Their eyes were not the eyes of simple beasts. They were shades of winter sky and glacial ice, pale blue, stormy gray, sharp silver. They held an intelligence, a chilling awareness that made my skin prickle with a fear I had never known. These were no ordinary wolves. They were shifters. They had to be. The largest of them, a colossal beast with a thick mane of fur around his neck and eyes the color of a frozen lake, stepped forward. The others made way for him, a silent, seamless acknowledgement of his authority. Even on 4 legs, he moved with a regal grace that spoke of absolute command. An alpha. He stopped a few feet from me, the heat of his body a palpable force. Snow melted from his fur, pooling on my dirt floor. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply sat, his immense head tilted, those piercing ice-blue eyes locked on mine. He was waiting. The rest of the pack arranged themselves around the small cabin with a disciplined quiet that was more unnerving than chaos. They shook the blizzard from their coats, their movements weary but controlled. They were exhausted, pushed to the very brink. I could see the subtle tremors in their legs, the shallow rise and fall of their chests. Terror held me in its icy grip. I should have been fighting, screaming, trying to drive them out. But as I looked from one magnificent, weary creature to another, my healer's instinct surged forward, drowning out the fear. One had a deep gash on its flank, the blood frozen black against its white fur. Another held its front paw aloft, barely touching the ground. Their ribs showed through their thick coats, telling a story of hunger and a long, desperate journey. They weren't here to harm me. They were here because they were dying. And I had already caused enough death for one lifetime. The decision settled in my soul, cold and clear. I could not turn them away. I took a shaky breath, forcing my limbs to move. I stepped away from the wall, my movements slow and deliberate. The alpha's eyes tracked every step, but he remained still, a silent, watchful sentinel. I went to the old cedar chest where I kept my meager medical supplies. I pulled out bundles of dried yarrow and comfrey, strips of clean linen, a bowl of warm water. I turned to the wounded wolf, the one with the gashed flank. I knelt. This was it, the moment of truth. My first touch. My hand trembled as I reached out. I expected him to flinch, to snap, but he only watched me, his gray eyes weary and resigned. My fingers made contact with his fur. It was softer than I imagined, thick and warm. I waited for a sign, for a sudden seizure, for his heart to stop. Nothing happened. He let out a soft sigh, his body relaxing slightly under my touch. A sob of relief caught in my throat. I set to work, cleaning the wound with the warm water, applying the crushed herbs, binding it with linen. I moved from one wolf to another, my healer's hands remembering their purpose. I cleaned paws raw from travel, checked for frostbite on ear tips, and offered sips of water from my own bowl. Through it all, the alpha never left my side. He shadowed me, a massive, warm presence. When I finished with the last wolf and stood, my back aching, he was there. He nudged my hand with his cold, wet nose, a gesture that felt startlingly like gratitude. I looked around my cabin. It was filled with sleeping wolves, their bodies creating a living carpet of white. The fire crackled, the wind howled, but inside, a strange, fragile peace had descended. I had let them in. I had touched them. And they were all still alive. As I banked the fire for the night, the alpha padded to my small cot in the corner and lay down on the floor right beside it, creating a barrier of warmth and muscle between me and the rest of the pack. It wasn't a threat. It was protection. Exhausted beyond measure, I slipped into my bed. Without thinking, my hand drifted from under the blankets and buried itself in the thick, soft fur of his shoulder. A deep, rumbling purr vibrated through him, a sound of profound contentment. I fell asleep like that, my fingers tangled in the fur of a king, surrounded by a pack of winter ghosts. For the first time in 3 years, I was not alone. And the terrifying, hopeful thought whispered in my mind as sleep took me, what if my curse was not what I had always believed? But the morning would bring clarity. The storm would break and they would leave. This was just a temporary respite, a single strange night in my long exile, wasn't it? The blizzard's fury had ceased, replaced by an eerie, absolute silence. Sunlight, blinding and pure, streamed through the ice-covered windows. I sat up, my heart already sinking. The cabin was empty. They were gone. Of course they were gone. It had all been a dream, a beautiful, painful dream born of loneliness and snow. But then my eyes fell on the floor. There, melted into the dirt and straw, were the distinct wet paw prints of 12 enormous wolves. And lying across the foot of my bed, like a claim staked upon my solitary life, was a single, perfect white feather, long and sleek, from a bird that had no business being in a winter storm. They had been real, and they had left me a message. But what did it mean? The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. For 3 years I had craved quiet, but this was different. This was an absence that echoed, highlighting the emptiness they had left behind. I swung my legs over the side of the cot, my bare feet flinching from the cold floorboards. My gaze swept the small room, taking in the evidence of their presence. The disturbed rushes on the floor, the empty water bowl, the lingering wild scent of pine and frost, and the feather. I picked it up. It was impossibly soft, stark white, and far too large to be from any common bird in these mountains. An eagle, perhaps? But it felt different. It felt deliberate. I tucked it carefully into the small pouch where I kept my most precious herbs, a strange, fluttering hope taking root beside my fear. The rest of the day was a hollow pantomime of my normal routine. I mended a tear in my cloak. I attempted to eat some broth. I tried to read my grandmother's old journals, but the words swam before my eyes. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made my heart leap into my throat. Was that a scratch at the door? A whine? But it was only the old building settling, only the ever-present mountain wind. I was alone. Truly, utterly alone again. The brief, crowded warmth of the previous night had made the solitude feel 10 times more desolate. I had tasted companionship, however strange, and the return to silence was a bitter drought. As dusk began to bleed the color from the sky, a new sound pulled me from my misery. Not a scratch, but a series of heavy, distinct thumps against the door. My breath hitched. They were back. The blizzard had returned. But no, the sky through the window was clear, peppered with the first sharp stars. Cautiously, I approached the door. "Who's there?" My voice was a rusty croak, unused to addressing another soul. A low, familiar chuff answered me. It was him, the Alpha. I slid the bolt back, my hands trembling, not with fear this time, but with a nervous, thrilling anticipation. The oar opened to reveal not the entire pack, but only him. Frost clung to his magnificent white coat, and his ice-blue eyes held mine with that same unnerving intelligence. He was alone. He padded inside, shaking the cold from his fur, and then turned to nudge the door closed with his head. He carried something in his mouth, a large, freshly caught snow hare. He dropped it at my feet with a soft thud, and then looked up at me, as if presenting a gift. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. He had brought me food. Payment for my aid? An offering? I didn't know, but the gesture undid me. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. He chuffed again and settled onto the rug before the fire, assuming his now customary position. He had returned. But why alone? Where was the rest of his pack? The questions swirled in my mind, but for now I was simply overwhelmingly grateful not to be alone in the deepening twilight. I prepared the hare, the mundane task feeling sacred. I cooked a portion for myself and offered him the rest, which he ate with a quiet dignity. We sat in a silence that was no longer empty, but comfortable, filled with the crackle of the fire and the simple understanding between two creatures sharing shelter. That night, as I lay in bed, he was there again, a solid, warm presence on the floor beside me. I found my hand once again seeking the comfort of his fur. "I don't even know what to call you," I murmured into the darkness. A name came to me then, not my own invention, but as if it had been whispered on the wind. Lukos. It was an old word from my grandmother's tales, meaning wolf. It suited him. Lukos. I tested the name out loud. In response, a deep, resonant rumble vibrated through his body, a sound of pure approval. He had accepted his name. The next morning, Lukos was gone again, but this time the hollow ache didn't return. He had left the other half of the hair for me, and he had come back. The pattern repeated for the next 3 days. He would vanish at first light and return at dusk, always alone, always with some offering, a grouse, a bundle of rare winter berries, a branch of fragrant pine for the fire. Our strange, silent courtship continued. I would talk to him, telling him about my day, about the herbs I was sorting, about my grandmother. He would listen, his intelligent eyes fixed on me, his presence a balm to my lonely soul. The 4th evening, he did not come at his usual time. The sun dipped below the peaks, and the indigo of twilight deepened into the black of night. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I paced the small cabin, my ears straining for any sound. Had he been hurt? Had his pack moved on? Had he decided I was not worth returning to? Just as despair was beginning to choke me, I heard it. Not a single set of paws, but many. A whole chorus of soft thuds and padding footsteps. My heart hammered against my ribs. I rushed to the door and pulled it open. Lukos stood there, and behind him, arrayed in the moonlight, were the other 11 wolves. They were all there, healthy and strong, their wounds healed, their eyes clear. They looked at me, and then, as one, they dipped their heads in a gesture of profound respect. Lukos stepped forward and nudged my hand with his nose, then turned to look back at his pack. The message was clear. He had brought them to show me, to show them me. This was not a random visit. This was an introduction. This was acceptance. But the moment was shattered by a sound that froze the blood in my veins. From the dark tree line, a long, low howl rose, a sound of pure malice that was nothing like the communicative calls of Lukos's pack. It was a challenge. It was a threat. Lukos's head snapped up, his body tensing. A low, dangerous growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that promised violence. The serene scene shattered into an imminent battle. The peaceful interlude was over. We were not alone on this mountain, and whatever was out there in the dark, it was coming for us. The growl that tore from Lukos's throat was a sound I had never heard before, primordial, vicious, and absolute. In an instant, the respectful, calm wolves behind him transformed. They fell into a tight, defensive formation around me and the cabin door, their lips pulled back in silent snarls, their bodies coiled springs of lethal intent. The air crackled with a tension so sharp I could taste it,
metallic and cold on my tongue. Another howl answered, closer this time, followed by a second and a third. They were surrounding us. I stumbled back into the cabin, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Lukos gave me one last piercing look, a clear command to stay, before he turned and melted into the darkness with his pack. The door swung shut, leaving me alone in the sudden, terrifying silence.
I rushed to the window, peering through a crack in the shutter. The moonlit clearing was a tableau of shadows and movement. I could see the sleek, white forms of Lycos's pack fanning out, their movements silent and synchronized. And emerging from the forest were other wolves. These were not majestic, winter-coated creatures. They were smaller, mangier, with patchy gray fur and eyes that gleamed with a feral, hungry light. Rogues. My blood ran cold. Rogues were outcast wolves, shifters who had broken pack law or been driven mad by loneliness. They were unpredictable, dangerous, and often starved. There were at least 8 of them, maybe more, lurking in the trees. The two groups faced each other, a frozen standoff in the snow. Then, with a silent signal I couldn't perceive, all hell broke loose. The night erupted into a cacophony of snarls, yelps, and the sickening thud of bodies colliding. It was a brutal, chaotic dance of teeth and claws. Lycos was a whirlwind of white fury, a force of nature. He moved with a power and precision that was terrifying to behold, taking on 2 rogues at once. His elite guard fought with the same deadly efficiency, each one a master of combat, working in pairs to isolate and overwhelm their opponents. But the rogues were desperate, and desperation made them vicious. One of them, a large brute with a scar across its muzzle, broke through the line and charged straight for the cabin. For me. I stumbled back from the window, my heart in my throat. I grabbed the iron poker from the fireplace, my hands slick with sweat. I could hear its claws scrabbling at the door, its hot, foul breath huffing through the cracks. The heavy oak door shuddered under its assault. Then a white blur shot past the window. It was one of Lycos's pack, the one I had privately named Storm for his fierce gray eyes. He slammed into the rogues, sending them both tumbling into the snow in a tingle of snapping jaws and flying fur. The fight was brief and brutal. Storm emerged, panting, the rogue lying still behind him. I watched the battle through my chink in the shutter, my knuckles white on the poker. I saw Lycos take a deep gash to his shoulder from a rogue's claw. A cry caught in my throat. I saw another of his wolves, the playful one I called River, limping badly but still fighting. I was a healer. I was meant to mend, to soothe, to save. Watching this violence, this spill of blood on the pure snow felt like a violation of my very soul. But I was also the reason they were here. They were protecting me. The battle seemed to last for hours, though it was probably only minutes. Finally, the last rogue let out a defeated yelp and fled back into the forest, its tail between its legs. The clearing fell silent, save for the heavy, panting breaths of the victorious pack. Lycos stood in the center of the clearing, his chest heaving, his magnificent white coat now splattered with dark, ominous stains. He threw his head back and let out a long, triumphant howl that was echoed by every one of his wolves. It was a sound of victory, of territory defended, of a claim asserted. The sound should have comforted me. Instead, a fresh wave of dread washed over me. The fight was over, but the damage was done. As if hearing my thoughts, Lycos turned and limped toward the cabin. The others followed, their heads held high, but I could see the wounds now. Limbs held at awkward angles, deep bites, torn flesh. I threw the door open, my healer's instinct overriding everything else. "Inside," I commanded, my voice surprisingly steady. "All of you, now!" They filed in, the scent of blood and battle filling the small space. I didn't have time for fear or hesitation. I stoked the fire into a roaring blaze, fetched my water and herbs and linen. I worked with a frantic, focused energy, moving from one wounded wolf to the next. I saved Lycos for last. His wound was the worst, a deep, ragged tear across his shoulder that was bleeding freely. As I cleaned it, my hands trembling, he flinched but did not pull away. His ice-blue eyes watched me, filled with a pain he was too proud to vocalize. "This is my fault," I whispered, as I applied a poultice of yarrow to staunch the bleeding. "They came because of me, because you're here with me." He made a low, negating sound in his throat and nudged my hand gently with his nose, as if to say, "It is my choice." Tears streamed down my face, mingling with the blood on my hands. I had believed my curse was to kill those who came close to me, but this was a different kind of danger. My presence had brought violence to their door. I had drawn a target on them simply by existing in their world. Lycos had fought for me. His pack had bled for me, and in doing so they had bound me to them with ties far stronger than I had ever known. But as I looked at his wounded shoulder, at the weary postures of his loyal guards, one terrifying question echoed in my mind. What would the next threat cost them? And how long could I stay knowing my very presence was a weapon aimed directly at their hearts? The metallic scent of blood hung in the air long after the last wound was bandaged, a grim perfume that refused to fade. Sleep was impossible. I sat with my back against the wall, watching the wounded pack. Their rhythmic breathing did little to soothe the turmoil inside me. Every soft whimper, every shift in position was a fresh lash of guilt. My solitary curse had now become a shared burden, and the weight of it was crushing. Lycos rested, but did not sleep. His ice-blue eyes were open, watchful, tracking my every movement from his place by the fire. He could sense my distress. As the first weak light of dawn tinged the windows, he stirred, rising with a stiffness that made my heart ache. He padded over to me and dropped something at my feet. It was a small, smooth stone, dark gray and streaked with a single perfect vein of white quartz. It was unlike any rock I had found near my cabin. He must have carried it from somewhere far away. He nudged it toward my hand with his nose. I picked it up. It was still warm from his touch. It wasn't food. It wasn't a tool. It was a gift. A simple, beautiful thing given for no other reason than to offer comfort. A fresh wave of tears, these of a bewildering, profound gratitude, welled in my eyes. In the face of the violence I had brought upon them, his response was to offer me a piece of quiet beauty. "It's beautiful, Lycos," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Thank you." He made that soft, rumbling sound deep in his chest and settled down beside me, his large body leaning against my leg. The simple, solid contact was more reassuring than any words could ever be. When the sun was fully up, the pack began to stir. Those who could walk went outside, sniffing the air, assessing the perimeter. The message was clear. The threat was gone for now, but the world was no longer safe. Lycos remained by my side, a silent sentinel. Later that morning, as I was checking River's leg, a strange sensation prickled at the edge of my awareness. It was a faint, cold throb like a distant headache, but it wasn't mine. I looked at River's bandaged limb and my fingers tingled. I focused on the feeling, and a clear, sharp image flashed in my mind, not a visual picture, but a knowing. I knew the bite went deeper than I had initially thought, that a fragment of a tooth was lodged against the bone. My breath caught. I looked from my hands to River's leg and back again. This was new. This was my healing gift, but amplified, sharpened. I fetched my finest probe, and guided by this strange new intuition, I carefully found and removed the tiny piece of tooth. River let out a sigh of pure relief, licking my hand fervently. I looked at Lycos, my eyes wide with shock. Can you feel that?" He simply looked back at me, his gaze deep and knowing. It was him, his presence. Our growing connection was wakening something in me. My curse had isolated me, but this bond was making my gift stronger. This revelation was followed by a more practical one. My food stores, already strained by feeding 12 enormous wolves, were now critically low. The venison haunch was a memory, the grains nearly gone. I looked at the nearly empty sack of oats, a familiar cold dread seeping back in. Survival was a daily calculation, and the numbers no longer added up. Lucas watched me as I stared into the near-empty storage chest. He chuffed softly, drawing my attention. Then he turned and nudged open the cabin door, looking back at me expectantly. "You want me to come with you?" I asked, incredulous. He dipped his head in a clear yes. Fear and a wild, reckless hope warred within me. To leave the safety of the cabin, to venture into his world, it was terrifying. But to stay here and starve, or to watch them starve protecting me, was not an option. I pulled on my warmest cloak and my sturdiest boots. Lucas led me outside, with two of his less injured guards, the ones I called North and Silver, falling in behind us. We did not go down the mountain, toward the world of men and packs that had rejected me. Instead, Lucas led me up, deeper into the treacherous high peaks I had always avoided. The journey was arduous, the snow was deep, and the air was thin and biting, but Lucas and his guards moved with an unerring confidence, creating a path for me, their powerful bodies breaking the trail. I followed, my lungs burning, my trust in them a fragile, growing thing. After an hour of climbing, we arrived at a place I never knew existed. It was a small, sheltered valley, protected from the worst of the winds by towering granite walls. And there, sheltered under a canopy of snow-laden pines, was a grove of winterberry bushes, their branches heavy with clusters of bright red fruit. Nearby, I spotted the telltale tracks of mountain grouse. It was a larder, a secret, high-altitude pantry known only to them. Tears of relief froze on my lashes. They weren't just showing me food, they were sharing their territory's secrets. They were trusting me with a piece of their world. We gathered as much as we could carry. On the way back, my pack heavy with berries and North carrying 2 plump grouse, a new feeling bloomed in my chest, warm and solid. It was the feeling of partnership, of being part of a team. But as we descended back toward the familiar sight of my cabin smoke, that feeling was pierced by a sudden, sharp warning from Lucas. He stopped dead, his head raised, his body rigid. A low growl vibrated in the air. North and Silver immediately moved to flank me, their postures defensive. Lucas was not looking at the cabin. He was looking at the sky. I followed his gaze. High above, circling with a lazy, menacing grace, was a huge black bird, a raven. It was too far away to be a threat, but its presence felt like an omen. It circled once, twice, and then flew off toward the east, in the opposite direction of Lucas's territory. Lucas watched it until it was a speck against the gray sky, his growl subsiding into a tense silence. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a new kind of worry. The rogues had been a direct, physical threat. This felt different. This felt like being watched. We had found food, and my gift had grown stronger, but the world had just become much, much larger. The enemy was no longer just at the door. It was in the sky, and it had seen us. The raven's shadow lingered long after the bird itself had vanished, a stain on the edge of my thoughts. The triumphant return with our bounty felt hollow. Lucas's tension was a live wire in the air, his gaze constantly flicking to the eastern ridge. The simple peace of the morning was shattered. Back inside the cabin, the mood had shifted. The wolves sensed it too. Their relaxed postures were gone, replaced by a watchful alertness. They ate the berries and grouse I offered, but their movements were economical, their ears constantly swiveling. We were a fortress under siege, waiting for the next assault. I tried to distract myself by tending to the wounds from the previous night. As I changed the bandage on Lucas's shoulder, the new, strange sense of my gift hummed under my skin. When my fingers brushed near the inflamed flesh, a jolt of cold, foreign anger shot up my arm. Not my anger, but a sharp, protective fury that was utterly alien. I gasped and snatched my hand back. Lukos turned his head, his blue eyes questioning. He hadn't made a sound. "Did you feel that?" I whispered. He gave a slow, deliberate blink. Yes. My gift wasn't just showing me physical wounds anymore. It was letting me feel their emotions, their protectiveness, their vigilance, their deep-seated worry for their alpha, and for me. The bond was weaving us together, stitching my soul to theirs with threads of shared sensation. It was beautiful and utterly terrifying. Where did I end and they begin? The rest of the day passed in a nerve-wracking quiet. As dusk fell, Lukos stood by the door with a clear intention in his stance. He was leaving again, but this time, he wasn't going hunting. He looked at me, then at two of his guards, the large, silent one I called Ghost, and the sharp-eyed one named Pale. He gave a soft, commanding bark. Ghost and Pale immediately moved to flank me, settling on either side of my chair with a resolute air. They were my guards. He was assigning them to me. A cold dread pooled in my stomach. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lukos's gaze was heavy with unspoken words. He nudged the door open and then paused, looking back at me one last time. There was a promise in his eyes and a warning. Stay. Be safe. Then he was gone, melting into the twilight with the rest of his pack, leaving me with only two silent, white-souled guardians. The cabin, which had felt so crowded hours before, now felt vast and empty. The silence was back, but it was a different kind of silence, a waiting silence, filled with the breath of two massive wolves and the thunderous beating of my own fearful heart. I couldn't sit still. I paced, my mind racing. Where was he going? To scout for the Raven's master? To confront whatever new threat loomed in the east? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. Hours dragged by. The fire died down to embers. Ghost and Pale never moved, never slept. Their unwavering vigilance was a comfort and a testament to the gravity of the situation. I finally collapsed onto my cot, exhaustion pulling me into a fitful, dream-riddled sleep. I dreamed of a vast, dark forest. I was running, my bare feet silent on the moss. Ahead of me, a figure in white moved between the trees. Lukos in his human form, though I never saw his face. He was leading me somewhere, but from the shadows, a voice, slick and cold as oil, whispered my name. "Alara, cursed child, he cannot protect you forever." I woke with a start, my heart hammering, the vile echo of that voice clinging to my mind. The cabin was still dark. Pale was standing, his head cocked, listening to something I couldn't hear. Ghost was at the door, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Then I heard it. Not a howl, not a scratch. A voice. A human voice, calling from a distance. "Hello, is anyone in there? We mean no harm." My blood turned to ice. Humans. No, not just humans. I could feel it, the subtle, shifting energy of other shifters. A mixed group. They had found me. I crept to the window, peering through the shutter. In the moonlit clearing stood 3 figures, 2 men and a woman, dressed in practical, travel-worn clothes. They looked normal, but my newly awakened senses screamed in alarm. The taller man, who had called out, was a shifter, a beta. The woman beside him radiated a calm, healing energy, a pack healer. The other man, standing slightly apart, had a stillness that felt dangerous, an enforcer. They were not rogues. They were an organized, purposeful group. Ghost's growl deepened, a clear warning that vibrated through the floorboards. Pale positioned himself directly in front of the door, a live-in barricade. "We saw the smoke," the tall man called again, his voice friendly but firm. "We're from the Cedar Fall Pack. To the east. We're searching for a missing member of our council, an elder. We were told a woman with distinctive features lived in these mountains. My breath caught. They weren't here by accident. They were looking for me. The raven had been a scout. It had led them right to my door. The enforcer took a step forward, his eyes scanning the cabin with a predatory gleam. We just want to talk. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my soul, that if I opened that door, I would never see Lycos again. They would take me, my curse, my gift, my very existence was the thing they were searching for. I was no longer just a rejected Omega hiding from my past. I was a prize to be claimed, and Lycos was out there, unaware that the true danger had already arrived. I was alone, with only 2 wolves to guard me, and the enemy was not at the gates. They were standing politely in my front yard, asking to be let in. The silence that followed the man's request was heavier than the mountain snow. I stood frozen, my back pressed against the cold wall, my mind racing. Cedar Fall Pack. East, the direction the raven had flown. This was no coincidence. They had been sent. Ghost's growl was a continuous low thunder now, a sound that promised violence if the door so much as trembled. Kale remained motionless, a statue of white fur and lethal intent. My 2 guardians were ready to die for me. The thought was as humbling as it was horrifying. "We know you're in there," the woman's voice came now, softer, trying a different tactic. "My name is Anya. I'm a healer. We mean you no harm. Our elder, Kaelen, he spoke of you before he disappeared. He said a pale Omega with the gift of true healing lived in the high mountains. He believed you could help our pack." Kaelen. The name meant nothing to me, but true healing? That was a term from my grandmother's oldest stories. It was a legend, a myth. My gift? It wasn't just a simple talent for herbs and poultices. It was the reason they were here, not for a curse, but for a blessing they desperately wanted. The enforcer's voice cut through the night, impatient and sharp. "Enough games. Open the door or we will." That was the truth I needed to hear. Politeness was a mask. Their intention was force. I had to answer. I had to buy time. Lycos would return. He had to. I took a shaky breath and called out, my voice thin but clear through the wooden door. "I have nothing for you. Please leave." "You misunderstand," the tall beta, their leader, replied. "This isn't a request. Kaelen was vital to our pack. His visions guided us. He vanished a month ago, but his last vision was of you. He said you were the key to our survival. You will come with us." Visions? A seer? Just like Lycos' mother. The pieces were clicking together into a picture I didn't want to see. 2 powerful packs, 2 seers, and both their prophecies were centered on me. I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand. "I am not your key," I shouted back, a surge of defiant anger cutting through my fear. "I have nothing for you. Please leave me alone." The response was immediate. A heavy weight slammed against the door, making the entire frame shudder. The enforcer was trying to break it down. Ghost and Pale erupted. Their barks were not the chuffs and whines I was used to. They were savage, battle-ready roars that shook the very foundations of the cabin. I grabbed the iron poker again, my hands slick with sweat, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Thump, thump. The door groaned, a long crack appearing in the solid oak. They were almost through. Just as the enforcer prepared for another charge, a new sound split the night, a sound that flooded me with a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. It was a howl, but not just any howl. It was Lycos's howl, filled with a fury so absolute it seemed to freeze the very air. It was close. The assault on the door ceased. Outside, I heard the Cedarfall shifters cursing, their voices now edged with alarm. Through the crack in the shutter, I saw them. Lycos and his entire pack stood at the tree line, their white forms glowing in the moonlight. They were not in a defensive formation, they were in an attack stance, a semicircle of bristling fur and bared teeth poised to strike. Lycos stood at the apex, his size magnified by the shadows, his eyes burning with a blue fire. He was no longer just a wolf, he was an avalanche of vengeance made flesh. The Cedarfall Beta held up his hands. He said, "Alpha King Kristoff, we did not know this territory was under your protection." My breath caught. Alpha King Kristoff. So that was his name. The truth of it settled in my soul, a key turning in a lock. Lycos? Kristoff took a single menacing step forward. He didn't need to speak. The message was clear. You are trespassing. You threatened what is mine. Now you will die. The enforcer shifted nervously, his hand going to the knife at his belt. Anya, the healer, grabbed his arm, her face pale. "Theron, don't. We are outnumbered. This was a mistake." The Beta, Theron, looked from Kristoff's deadly pack to our battered door. He knew they had lost. He said, "Our apologies, Your Majesty. We were misinformed. We will take our leave." Kristoff let out a short, sharp bark. It was a command. Run. They didn't need to be told twice. The three shifters turned and fled into the forest, disappearing into the shadows from whence they came. The clearing was empty again, but the peace was gone, replaced by the aftermath of a different kind of battle. Kristoff turned and bounded to the cabin. He didn't wait for me to open the door. He shifted his weight and slammed his shoulder against it, the already damaged wood splintering around the bolt. He pushed his way inside, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on me. He crossed the space in 2 strides. He didn't nudge my hand or chuff softly. He pressed his massive head against my chest, a deep, shuddering breath racking his body. I could feel the frantic beat of his heart, the tremor in his muscles. He had been terrified for me. I buried my face in his fur, my own tears finally breaking free. They knew my name. They said a seer sent them. They called me the Key. Kristoff pulled back, his ice-blue eyes meeting mine. In their depths, I saw no surprise, only a grim resignation. He knew. He knew other packs would come for me. His mother's prophecy wasn't just about finding me, it was about keeping me safe from the rest of the world. The danger was not passing, it was just beginning, and I could no longer hide in my cabin pretending I was just a cursed Omega waiting to die. I was Alara, the true mate of an Alpha King, with a gift that made me a target. The time for hiding was over. The splintered door hung from a single hinge, a stark monument to the night's invasion. We couldn't stay here. The cabin was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap, its location known to our enemies. As the first rays of dawn touched the broken threshold, the reality of our situation settled over us with the weight of stone. Kristoff's pack worked with a quiet, grim efficiency. While 2 stood guard at the tree line, the others helped me gather my things. There was no time for sentiment. My grandmother's journals, my pouch of herbs, the white feather, the quartz stone. These few precious items were all I could take. I ran my fingers over the familiar rough wood of the table, the hearth where I'd spent so many lonely nights. I was saying goodbye to the last 3 years of my life, to the prison that had also been my refuge. Christoph watched me, his human intelligence blazing in his blue eyes. He nudged my pack with his nose, a gentle but insistent question. "Are you ready?" I took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. "I'm ready." He turned and led the way out of the broken cabin, his pack falling into formation around us. We were not heading deeper into the anonymous wilderness. We were turning east, toward the rising sun, toward his territory, toward his home. The journey was a blur of strained muscles and cold air. We moved at a punishing pace, Christoph setting a speed that spoke of urgency. The landscape began to change subtly. The jagged, unforgiving peaks around my cabin gradually softened into rolling, forested hills. The air lost its biting edge, carrying instead the scent of pine and frozen earth. My body ached, but my mind was a whirlwind. Alpha King. The words echoed with every step. The sheer scale of what it meant was staggering. He wasn't just the leader of a pack. He was the ruler of a territory, a king. And he had been sleeping on the floor of my one-room hut. He had fought off rogues for me. He had chosen me. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of violet and rose, we crested a final hill. The sight that unfolded below stole the breath from my lungs. It was not a village. It was a kingdom nestled in a vast, sheltered valley. A great lodge, built of massive timber and dark stone, rose from the center, its peaks and gables looking like the crown of the mountain itself. Smoke curled from dozens of chimneys in the surrounding cabins, which were laid out in orderly, concentric circles. Lights twinkled in the windows, and even from this distance, I could see the movement of people, hundreds of people. And beyond the settlement, under the twilight sky, stretched a frozen lake that shone like a slab of polished silver. This was the heart of the Northern Crown Pack. This was his world. My steps faltered. The sheer magnitude of it was overwhelming. These weren't just 12 wolves I had to win over. This was an entire nation. Christoph stopped beside me, his shoulder pressing against my leg in silent support. He looked from his kingdom to my face, his eyes asking the unspoken question. "It's immense," I whispered, my voice small. He chuffed softly, a sound of reassurance, and began to lead the way down the winding path into the valley. As we drew closer, people began to notice. Wolves in both forms stopped their activities to watch our procession. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon me, curious, assessing, suspicious. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd like a contagion. I heard the words clearly on the cold, still air. Pale. Omega. The king's guest. My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, on the imposing doors of the great lodge, using Christoph's steady presence as an anchor. We reached the wide steps of the lodge. The crowd that had gathered was silent now, the tension thick enough to choke on. Christoph stepped forward and shifted. The transformation was seamless, a ripple of power and light. One moment he was a massive white wolf, the next he was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating an authority that silenced the last of the whispers. He stood naked and unashamed, his platinum hair falling around his shoulders, his ice-blue eyes sweeping over his people. He did not look at them for long. He turned, his gaze finding me, pinning me in place. Then he spoke, his voice deep and resonant, carrying to every corner of the gathering. People of the Northern Crown, he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is Ilara. She saved my life and the lives of your elite guard in the heart of the blizzard. She is the pale omega of prophecy, foretold by my mother. She is my chosen, my intended Luna. A collective gasp went through the crowd. I saw shock, disbelief, and in some eyes a flicker of hostility. An elderly woman, with hair as white as mine, stepped forward from the crowd. Her back was straight, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She looked from Kristoff to me, her gaze lingering on my pale hair and eyes. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then, a slow smile spread across her wrinkled face, her voice strong and clear. "Took you long enough, boy," she said. Her mother told me she'd have hair like winter moonlight. "Welcome, child. We've been waiting for you." Her name was Maeve, I would learn later. She was the pack historian, the keeper of their oldest lore. Her acceptance was like a stone dropped in a pond, sending ripples through the crowd. The tension didn't vanish, but it lessened. People began to murmur, some nodding, others still looking wary. Kristoff offered me his arm. I took it, my fingers trembling against the solid muscle of his forearm. And as he led me up the steps and through the great doors of the lodge, I felt the eyes of the entire pack on my back. I was no longer Ilara, the rejected Omega. I was Ilara, the intended Luna of the Alpha King. I had walked out of the wilderness and into the heart of a world I did not understand. A world of politics, power, and ancient prophecies. The cabin had been simple. This was complex. The blizzard had been a trial of nature. This would be a trial of will. The doors closed behind us, shutting out the stairs but not the pressure. I was inside the wolf's den, and I had to prove I belonged here. The great hall of the lodge was a vast, echoing space, with a ceiling supported by massive timber beams and a stone fireplace large enough to stand in. Tapestries depicting wolves, mountains, and the moon adorned the walls. The air smelled of wood smoke, roasting meat, and the subtle collective scent of a thriving pack. It was overwhelming. Kristoff led me to a set of rooms at the rear of the lodge, his chambers. They were spacious and comfortable, with furs on the floor and a large bed piled with blankets. A fire crackled in the hearth, and windows looked out over the moonlit valley. He turned to me, his expression unreadable, his voice softer now, meant only for me. "These are my rooms," he said. "They are yours now, too. If you wish for separate quarters, I will have them prepared immediately. I want you to feel safe here." I looked from the bed to his face, seeing the earnest honesty in his eyes. The thought of being alone in a strange, unfamiliar room in this vast, bustling lodge was more terrifying than the thought of sharing his space. "I want to stay here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The relief that washed over his features was profound. He nodded, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "Then it is settled." The next few days were a disorienting whirlwind. Maeve became my shadow, a kind but firm guide to the intricate social web of the pack. I was introduced to the council elders, the head warriors, the head cook. I learned names and faces until my head spun. Everyone was polite, but I felt the constant assessing weight of their gazes. I was an outsider, a strange, pale creature who had appeared from the mountains and captured their king's heart. They were waiting to see if I would break. My only solace was the elite guard. Sterling, the healer, immediately took me to the pack's infirmary, his eyes lighting up as we discussed herbal remedies. Asher and River, the bonded pair, showed me the training grounds, their playful nudges of familiar comfort. They treated me not as a curiosity, but as their Luna, their friend. They were my anchor in this sea of newness. But the pack's doubts were a constant undercurrent. During a meal in the great hall, I overheard a warrior mutter to his companion, "Can't even sense her wolf properly. How can a weak Omega be our Luna?" Another time, a group of she-wolves fell silent as I passed, their eyes sharp with judgment. The worst was the council meeting. Kristoff insisted I attend. They were discussing the Cedar Fall Pack's incursion. "An act of war," a grizzled elder named Boren stated, slamming his fist on the table. "They crossed our borders, threatened our Luna." "Intended Luna," corrected a sleek, sharp-faced woman named Lyra. She was the pack's head scout, and her gaze was like a shard of ice. "The bond is not yet formalized, and we must ask, why did they want her? This true healing they spoke of. What does it mean? What danger has the king brought into our midst?" All eyes turned to me. My throat went dry. I could feel the suspicion radiating from half the table. Kristoff's voice cut through the tension, cold and final. "Ilara is under my protection. She is my chosen. That is the end of the discussion. The Cedar Fall Pack will be dealt with. Our focus is on strengthening our defenses and proving to our allies that the Northern Crown is as strong as ever." He defended me, but the damage was done. Lyra's words echoed in my mind. What danger has the king brought into our midst? That night, lying beside Kristoff in the large bed, I couldn't sleep. The weight of expectation, of suspicion, was crushing me. I felt like an imposter. I missed the simple, brutal honesty of survival in my cabin. "You are quiet," Kristoff murmured in the darkness. "I don't belong here," I whispered, the confession tearing from me. "They all see it. I'm not a Luna. I'm just a healer from the mountains." He turned onto his side, his face inches from mine in the dim firelight. He said, "You are wrong," he said, his voice fierce. "You belong with me. That is the only thing that matters. They do not see your strength yet, but they will. I will make them see." "But how?" I asked, despair creeping into my voice. He said, "By being who you are," he said simply. "Your compassion, your quiet strength, your gift, that is what this pack needs. Not more politics and posturing. They just don't know it yet." The next morning, an opportunity presented itself. A commotion erupted near the training grounds. A young warrior, no more than 16, had taken a bad fall during a sparring match. His leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and he was white with pain and shock. The pack's healers, including Sterling, were gathered around him, their faces grim. "It's a compound fracture," Sterling said to Kristoff, who had arrived with me in tow. "The bone has pierced the skin. The risk of infection is high. He will likely walk with a limp if he keeps the leg at all." The boy's mother was sobbing quietly. The crowd of onlookers was somber. My feet moved before my mind could catch up. I knelt beside the boy, ignoring the surprised murmurings. "What's your name?" I asked softly. "Kale," he gritted out through clenched teeth. "Kale, this is going to hurt, but I can help you." I looked at Sterling. "I need clean water, linen, and my pouch from my chambers, now." There was a moment of hesitation, but Kristoff gave a sharp nod. Sterling rushed off. I placed my hands on Kale's leg, above and below the break. I closed my eyes, pushing aside my fear and the stares of the pack. I focused. The familiar tingle started in my fingers, but it was stronger now, a river of cool, clear energy. I could see the break in my mind's eye, the jagged edges of the bone, the torn muscle, the threat of sepsis lurking there. I poured all my will into it. I envisioned the bone knitting together, clean and straight. I envisioned the flesh healing, the skin sealing. I didn't know what I was doing. I was only following the instinct that roared to life inside me. A soft silver light emanated from my hands, so faint I thought I might be imagining it, but the gasps from the crowd told me I was not. Cale gasped, not in pain, but in shock. He said, "The pain, it's fading." I poured every ounce of my strength into him, feeling my own energy drain. When I finally opened my eyes, swaying with exhaustion, the wound was closed. The skin was pink and new, the leg straight. It was healed. The silence was absolute. I looked up at the faces surrounding me. The suspicion was gone, replaced by awe, by shock, by reverence. Lyra was staring, her mouth slightly agape. Boren's fierce eyes were wide. Sterling knelt and gently felt Cale's leg. He announced, "The bone, it's solid. It's completely healed." Cale slowly, carefully got to his feet. He put weight on the leg. Then he took a step. A cheer erupted from the crowd, loud and joyous. I looked at Kristoff. He was watching me, his ice blue eyes blazing with a pride so intense it stole my breath. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. As the crowd celebrated, Maeve stepped to my side, her wise old eyes gleaming. "The true healing," she said quietly, for my ears only. "The blessing of the moon goddess made manifest. They see it now, child. They see you." I had faced their suspicion not with words, but with action, not with a title, but with my gift. I had not just healed a boy's leg, I had begun to heal the pack's doubt. The pale Omega from the mountains was gone. In her place stood their Luna. The healing of Cale changed everything. Overnight, the whispers of suspicion transformed into murmurs of awe. Where I once felt critical eyes, I now saw respectful nods. Warriors who had previously looked through me now bowed their heads as I passed. "Luna," they would murmur, the title now imbued with genuine respect. It was overwhelming in a new way. I was no longer an outsider, but a figure of fascination. My every move was watched, not with judgment, but with a kind of reverent curiosity. The weight of it was immense. Kristoff, sensing my unease, began to include me in the true workings of the pack. It was no longer just about appearances, it was about governance. I sat beside him as he listened to disputes between pack members, arguments over land use, minor squabbles between families, requests for aid. At first, I only listened, but soon he began to ask for my opinion. "What do you see, Alara?" he would ask quietly, after a particularly tense argument between two farmers over a damaged fence. "The fence is not the true problem," I said one afternoon, my voice gaining confidence. "They are both afraid of not having enough for the winter. The fence is just the place where their fear has met." Kristoff looked from the two chastened men to me, a slow smile spreading across his face. He addressed them. "You will both work together to repair the fence, and from the royal stores you will each be given an extra portion of grain to see you through the deep winter. Let there be no more strife between you." The solution was so simple, so obvious, and it resolved the tension completely. The men left not just pacified, but grateful. I had seen the root, not just the symptom. This became my role. While Kristoff provided the strong, decisive leadership of an alpha, I provided the healing touch of a Luna. I soothed fears, mended emotional rifts, and saw the hidden wounds that festered beneath the surface of pack life. My gift was not just for broken bones, it was for broken trust. One evening, Maeve found me in the library, studying an old map of the territory. "You have a queen's heart, child," she said, settling into the chair opposite me. "Kristoff rules with his head and his strength. You will rule with your heart and your insight. A pack needs both to be truly strong." Her words warmed me, but they also sparked a new anxiety. To rule. It was a future I was still struggling to accept. My connection with Kristoff deepened through this shared work. Our silences were no longer just comfortable, they were communicative. A glance across the council table could convey a shared thought. A touch of his hand on my back was all I needed to feel grounded amidst the chaos. The bond between us was a living, breathing thing, strengthening every day, a constant, warm hum in my soul. I loved him. The knowledge was as solid and certain as the mountains themselves. Yet the fear of the final step, the marking, was a cold shard of ice that never fully melted. One afternoon, a scout returned, his face grim. He brought news from the borders. The Cedar Fall pack was not retreating. They were gathering. Their alpha, a ruthless wolf named Torvin, had publicly declared that the Pale Healer was a resource that belonged to all packs, not just the Northern Crown. He was rallying support from smaller, neighboring packs, using promises of healing and prophecies of power to build a coalition against us. The peace we had found was an illusion. We were on the brink of war, and I was the cause. The council was in an uproar. Boren advocated for a preemptive strike. Lyra suggested diplomatic envoys, but her tone lacked conviction. Kristoff listened to it all, his expression granite. When the room finally fell silent, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "There will be no strike. There will be no envoys. They have threatened my mate. They have challenged my authority. They believe us weak because we have a healer for a Luna." He stood, his presence filling the room. "They will learn their error. We will fortify our borders. We will call our banners. And if Torvin sets one paw across our boundary river, we will show him the true meaning of Northern Crown strength." It was a declaration of war. The room erupted in shouts of agreement, the warriors pounding the table. The time for healing was over. The time for battle had come. Later, in the quiet of our chambers, the reality of it crashed down on me. "This is because of me," I said, my voice hollow. "People will die because of me." Kristoff came to me, taking my hands in his. "No, Alara, this is because of Torvin's greed and ambition. You are not a cause for war. You are the reason we must win it. You are the future of this pack. You are my future." He looked at me, his eyes full of a love so fierce it was almost painful to behold. "I have waited, my love. I have been patient. But facing this, the thought of going into a conflict without our bond being complete, I need to know you are truly mine. In every way, I need the strength of our completed bond." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment I had both longed for and dreaded. "I love you, Kristoff," I whispered, the words finally free. "With all that I am." A brilliant, breathtaking hope lit his face. "Then, Alara, will you allow me to mark you? Will you complete our bond and become my Luna, not just in title, but in soul?" The ghost of Marcus and Cain rose before me, their lifeless eyes a final warning. But then I looked at Kristoff. I saw not a victim of a curse, but the other half of my soul. I saw the king who needed his queen. I saw the man I loved more than my own fear. I took his face in my hands, my pale fingers stark against his skin. I poured all my love, all my trust into my gaze. Yes, I said, my voice clear and sure. I am ready. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the firelight dancing in his ice-blue eyes. The fears that had haunted me for years, the ghosts of a past I had misunderstood, they did not vanish, but they finally lost their power over me. Love was a stronger magic than any curse. His hands came up to cradle my face, his touch infinitely gentle. I have dreamed of this, he murmured, his voice a rough caress. Since the moment I saw you, standing brave and terrified in that cabin, I have dreamed of the day your soul would call to mine without reservation. He leaned in, and his lips met mine. This kiss was different from all the others. It was not a question nor a patient promise. It was a claiming, deep and consuming, a fusion of two spirits reaching for each other across a chasm of loneliness and fear. I poured every ounce of my love into it, my hands tangling in his platinum hair, holding him to me as if he were my only anchor in a storm-tossed sea. When we finally broke apart, breathless, the bond between us was a palpable force, humming with an energy that made the air crackle. I could feel his love for me, a vast, steady, sun-warmed ocean, and beneath it, I could feel his wolf, proud, protective, and fiercely joyful. He led me to the bed, his movements reverent. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time, his forehead resting against mine. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I answered, my voice steady. What followed was not the frantic coupling of my previous tragic bonds. It was a slow, tender exploration. It was a conversation without words, a dance of two souls learning the final, intimate steps of their union. His hands mapped my body as if I were sacred ground, worshipping the pale skin that had once been my shame. In his eyes I saw only beauty, only perfection. And when the moment of ultimate joining came, it was not a violation, but a homecoming, a sense of rightness, of completion so profound it brought tears to my eyes. This was what a true bond was meant to be. This was what the moon goddess had intended. It was warm and perfect and whole. Afterward, we lay entwined, my head on his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of his heart. It beat on, powerful and unwavering. He was alive. He was mine. He shifted, his lips brushing my temple. "It is time," he whispered. I tilted my head, baring the pale column of my neck to him, an act of absolute trust. "I am yours, Christoph, always." His teeth sank into the tender skin of my mating gland. The world exploded. It was nothing like the forced, painful snap of my previous bonds. This was a symphony. It was a golden, blinding light that flooded every cell of my being. It was the feeling of a missing piece of my soul slotting perfectly into place. My minds, my hearts, our very essences fused together in a cascade of pure, undiluted joy. I could feel his unwavering strength flowing into me, and I knew my gentle compassion was flowing into him. We were no longer two, but one complete being. The bond settled into a constant warm hum in my chest, a tether of pure love that connected me to him no matter the distance. I could feel the edges of his consciousness, the depth of his devotion, the fierce protectiveness that defined him. It was the most beautiful, the most right thing I had ever experienced. He pulled back, his eyes searching mine, full of a love so deep it was dizzying. Ilara, he breathed, my name a prayer on his lips. A laughter, pure and free, bubbled out of me. I felt whole. The cursed Omega was gone forever. In her place was a woman complete, a Luna bound to her king. I can feel you, I whispered in wonder, tracing the line of his jaw. And you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He kissed me again, softly. My mate, my Luna, my everything. We slept wrapped in each other's arms, the completed bond, a warm, living blanket around us. For the first time since I was a child, I felt truly, utterly safe. I was woken not by a sound, but by a new sensation, a pull, an awareness that was not my own. I opened my eyes to the pre-dawn gray. Kristoff was already awake, propped on an elbow, watching me. "What is it?" I asked, the bond telling me his mind was elsewhere. "The pack," he said softly. "I can always feel them, but now, through you, it's different, clearer." He closed his eyes for a moment. An elder is in pain, arthritis flaring in the cold. A new mother is anxious, her milk is slow to come. 2 guards on the eastern wall are bickering over a lost bet. He opened his eyes, looking at me in awe. "Your gift, it's woven into our bond. I can feel the pack's health, their emotional state, through you." The implications were staggering. As a Luna, I was the heart of the pack, and now, with our bond complete, I had become its literal nervous system. I could sense its ailments before they became crises. The fear of war still loomed, a dark cloud on the horizon. But in that quiet dawn, a new, unshakable confidence was born within me. We were no longer just a king and his queen. We were a united front, our strengths fused into something greater. His strategic mind and my empathic sense, his power and my healing. Torvin and the Cedarfall pack thought they were coming for a vulnerable healer and an isolated king. They had no idea what they were truly facing. As the sun finally rose, painting the valley in gold and pink, Kristoff and I stood together at the window, his arms wrapped around me from behind. The completed bond was a steady, powerful drumbeat between us. "Let them come," I said, my voice quiet but firm. The last vestige of fear was gone, replaced by a Luna's resolve. "They will find us ready." He tightened his embrace, his lips against my hair. "Together," he vowed. "Together," I echoed. The game had changed. The king and his Luna were ready for war. The formal marking ceremony under the full moon was no longer just a ritual. It was a statement, a declaration of strength to a pack on the brink of war and a warning to our enemies watching from beyond the mountains. I stood before the gathered northern crown, draped in a gown of silver-white fur that shimmered under the moon's gaze. My pale hair was unadorned, a cascade of winter moonlight. I felt no fear, only the steady, resonant hum of the bond connecting me to Kristoff, a cord of pure, unbreakable light. The pack's energy washed over me, a sea of anticipation, loyalty, and a newfound, fierce protectiveness for their Luna. Kristoff stood before me, every inch the Alpha King. His love for me was a private flame in his public gaze, but his expression was one of absolute, unyielding authority. He spoke the ancient vows, his voice rolling over the silent, snow-blanketed clearing like thunder. "Before the moon goddess and our pack, I claim Ilara as my soul's mirror, my heart's keeper, my eternal mate. Her strength is my strength. Her life is my life." Then he turned to me. His teeth found the mark on my neck, not to break the skin anew, but to seal the bond before our people. As his lips brushed my skin, a collective howl erupted from the pack, a sound of unity, of acceptance, of raw, primal power that vibrated in the very air we breathed. It was not just a celebration, it was a battle cry. In that moment, I was no longer Ilara, the intended Luna. I was Luna, the heart of the Northern Crown. The feeling was not of pride, but of profound responsibility. These were my people, to protect, to heal, to lead. In the days that followed, the pack transformed into a war machine. The completion of our bond had ignited a new, unified fervor. Kristoff's strategic mind was sharp, his commands executed with flawless precision, but now my role was fully integrated. I didn't just observe, I participated. Sitting in the War Council, I closed my eyes and let my gift flow through the bond, sensing the emotional state of our people. The warriors from the Southern Ridge are loyal, but they are afraid. Their alpha doubts our chances. He fears the Cedarfall numbers. I said this, my eyes still closed. Kristoff's gaze sharpened. He dispatched Lyra not with a threat, but with a promise of shared spoils and a personal guarantee of their alpha's safety. The Southern Ridge contingent's morale visibly solidified. When a sickness threatened to sweep through the dens where the mothers and pups were sheltered, I didn't need to be told. I felt the creeping tendrils of fever and fear through the pack's collective consciousness. Sterling and I worked tirelessly, but it was my empathic sense that pinpointed the source, a contaminated water runnel, allowing us to stop the outbreak before it could truly begin. I was the pack's compass, their early warning system. Kristoff was the sword, and I had become the shield. The elite guard, my first friends in this new world, were our right hand. Asher and River led scouting missions. Their bonded synergy made them an unstoppable pair. Sterling organized the field medics, implementing the new techniques we had developed together. They treated me with a familiar ease, but now it was underscored by a deep, unwavering respect. I was their Luna, but I was also the woman who had saved their lives in a blizzard. One evening, a scout, pale and bleeding from a gash on his arm, staggered into the lodge. He brought the news we had been dreading and expecting. "They're massing at the Serpent's Cast, my king," he gasped, leaning heavily on the table. "Torvin leads them. At least 3 allied packs stand with him. They outnumber us 2-1. A grim silence fell over the council. Bourne's face was a mask of grim acceptance. Lyra's lips were pressed into a thin line. But Kristoff was calm. He looked at me, and through our bond, I felt not fear, but a cold, focused certainty. Then we will meet them at the pass. We hold the high ground, we know the terrain, and we have something they do not. He didn't explain it. He didn't need to. Every person in the room looked at me. We were outnumbered, but we were not outmatched. We had a unity they lacked. We had a king who led with wisdom and a Luna who felt the very heartbeat of her people. The war was no longer a specter on the horizon. It was here. The march to the Serpent's Pass was a somber, determined procession. I rode beside Kristoff, not tucked away safely at the rear, but where every warrior could see me. My presence was a banner. My calm, which I drew from the steady rhythm of our bond, was a tonic for their nerves. I could feel their fear, their resolve, their love for their home, and I sent back waves of reassurance, of strength, through the invisible network that now connected us all. The pass was a narrow, treacherous defile between 2 sheer granite cliffs, the only practical entrance into the heart of our territory. On the high ground, we had the advantage. Below, the Cedarfall Alliance was a dark, seething mass of wolves and men. Their banners I didn't recognize fluttered in the cold wind. The jagged pine of the Broken Tusk Pack, the crimson claw of the Blood Moon tribe. Torvin had bought his army with promises he could never keep. We took our positions. Kristoff gave his final commands, his voice carrying easily on the thin mountain air. He turned to me, his ice-blue eyes holding mine. There were no words. He poured his love, his trust, his fierce hope into me through our bond, and I poured my unwavering faith back into him. He kissed me hard and quick, a promise of a future beyond this day. Then he shifted. The Alpha King was gone, and in his place stood Lycos, the colossal white wolf of the blizzard, his battle cry a roar that was echoed by every one of his warriors. The battle began. It was a chaos of snarls, shrieks of metal, and the sickening thud of bodies. From my vantage point, protected by a ring of elite guards, I watched the tide of war ebb and flow. Kristoff was a demon of white fury, a strategic genius even in wolf form, directing his forces with sharp barks and devastating attacks. But I was not just a spectator. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my gift. The battlefield was a maelstrom of pain and terror, but I focused. I found our warriors, one by one. There, a young wolf from the southern ridge had a deep gash on his leg, his fear threatening to paralyze him. I sent a pulse of calm, of strength directly to him. I felt his panic recede, his resolve harden. He fought on. There, Sterling was overwhelmed, 3 wounded warriors bleeding out behind our lines. I pinpointed the one whose life was fading fastest and pushed a surge of healing energy toward him, stabilizing him long enough for Sterling to reach him. I was the lighthouse in their storm, the steady hand on their shoulder. I couldn't fight with tooth and claw, but I fought with the very spirit of the pack. Then I felt it, a spike of agony so sharp it stole my breath. Kristoff. My eyes flew open. He had been flanked. 2 enormous wolves from the Blood Moon tribe had him pinned, while Torvin himself, a hulking, dark-furred beast, circled for the killing blow. A scream lodged in my throat. The Bond screamed with his pain, his momentary disorientation. The elite guard around me tensed, ready to charge to his aid, but they would never make it in time. "No," I whispered. I didn't think. I acted. I pushed past Ghost, ignoring his warning snarl, and ran to the very edge of the cliff. I raised my hands to the sky, not in supplication, but in command. I poured every ounce of my will, every shred of the power the completed bond had given me, out over the battlefield. I did not attack. I did not harm. I revealed. A wave of pure silver light erupted from me, washing over the combatants. It was the light of truth, of connection. For a fleeting, breathtaking moment, every wolf on that battlefield felt it. Our warriors felt the strength of their bonds, the love for their families, the righteousness of their cause. The enemy wolves felt the hollowness of Torvin's promises, the artificiality of their alliance, the sudden, stark understanding that they were dying for a lie. The effect was instantaneous. The Blood Moon wolves hesitated, confusion in their eyes. The broken tusk pack faltered, their coordinated attack breaking down. It was the opening Kristoff needed. With a roar of renewed power, he threw off his attackers. He moved like lightning, his focus absolute. He didn't go for the lesser wolves, he went straight for Torvin. The fight between the 2 alphas was brutal and short. Kristoff's strength, fueled by our bond and the unified spirit of his pack, was overwhelming. He disarmed Torvin with a savage twist of his head and locked his powerful jaws on the dark wolf's throat. The silence that fell was deafening. Torvin yielded, a single, choked whine, the signal of his defeat. The battle was over. The enemy alliance, its heart cut out, broke and fled back through the pass. I stood on the cliff, my body trembling with exhaustion, my spirit soaring with relief. Kristoff shifted back to his human form, bloodied but victorious. He looked up at me, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with a love and a pride that eclipsed the sun. He had won the battle with strength and strategy, but I had won the war with the heart of a Luna. The victory at Serpent's Pass was not just a military success, it was a transformation. The legend of the Pale Omega was forever sealed. I was no longer just the healer or the king's mate. I was the Silver Luna, whose light had revealed the truth and broken the enemy's will. The packs that had allied with Cedarfall sent envoys not of defiance, but of contrition, bearing gifts and seeking treaties under the benevolent gaze of the Northern Crown. Peace, a true and lasting peace, settled over our territory. The fear was gone, replaced by a golden age of prosperity and unity. My days were filled with the joyful work of a Luna in peacetime. I presided over mating ceremonies, blessed new pups, and settled disputes with a wisdom that felt both innate and gifted. The Healing Lodge, run by Sterling and myself, became a center of learning, attracting healers from allied packs. Yet the most profound change was within our bond. With the external threats gone, it deepened into something even more beautiful. It was in the quiet moments that I felt it most strongly. I'd be sorting herbs, and a wave of pure, unadulterated joy would wash over me. I'd look up, and through the window, I'd see Christoph laughing with a group of young warriors, his face relaxed and bright. His happiness was my happiness. Sometimes a flicker of frustration would prickle at the edge of my awareness. I'd find him in his study, wrestling with a tedious trade agreement, and I'd bring him a cup of tea. My presence alone soothing his irritation. We could have entire conversations without speaking a word. A shared glance across a crowded hall could convey amusement, love, or a silent plan to escape the formalities early. We were two halves of a single soul, our lives intertwined in a dance of perfect understanding. One afternoon, we walked hand in hand through the woods near the frozen lake, the same path that we had taken when he first showed me his kingdom. The silence between us was warm and full. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked softly. "The silence of your cabin?" I stopped and looked out over the valley, at the smoke rising from the lodges, the sounds of children playing, the vibrant, pulsing life of the pack. I thought of the crushing loneliness, the constant fear, the hollow ache of believing I was a monster. I turned to him, reaching up to touch his face. "I had silence," I said, "but I had no music. I had solitude, but I had no companionship. This," I gestured to the world around us, to him, "this is a symphony. What I had before was just an echo." He pulled me into his arms, holding me as if I were the most precious thing in his world. And in that moment, surrounded by the love of my mate and the pack that was my family, I knew with absolute certainty that every moment of pain, every second of loneliness had been worth it. It had all led me here, to him, to home. The curse had never been real. It had been a path, a long and painful one that led me to my destiny. I was not Death's bride. I was the Silver Luna, the true mate of the Alpha King, and my story was no longer one of sorrow, but of a love written in the stars, forged in blizzards, and sealed in the sacred light of the moon. Our story was just beginning. The peace was a blanket, warm and heavy, and I wrapped myself in it, learning its every fold. Spring began to whisper at the edges of the winter, and with it, a new kind of energy stirred in the pack. It was a time of renewal, of planting, of looking forward. My life had found a rhythm as steady as the turning seasons, and the bond between Christoph and I was the drumbeat at its heart. It was during a visit to the Healing Lodge that the first tremor of the future touched me. I was helping Sterling inventory our spring medicinal herbs when a sudden, overwhelming wave of scent assaulted me. The sharp, clean fragrance of pine sap, usually so comforting, felt like a physical blow. My stomach lurched, and the world tilted on its axis. Sterling was at my side in an instant, his healer's gaze sharp and assessing. "Ilara, what is it?" I don't know," I managed, leaning against a shelf, my breath coming in short gasps. "The smell, it's too much." He guided me to a chair, his fingers going to my wrist to check my pulse. His eyes widened slightly, then a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He didn't speak, just looked at me with a joy so profound it was almost reverent. Through the bond, I felt a jolt of alarm from Christoph, followed by a torrent of questions. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" His presence surged toward the lodge, a protective storm. Before I could form a coherent thought to send back to him, the doors flew open and he was there, his face etched with panic. "Alara!" Sterling stood, his smile unwavering. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "There is nothing wrong, quite the opposite." Kristoff looked from Sterling's beaming face to my pale, confused one. "Explain." Sterling gestured to me. "The heightened senses, the sudden sensitivity, the fatigue you've been hiding, my Luna." He paused, letting the unspoken truth hang in the air, fragrant and potent as the herbs around us. "The moon goddess blesses the northern crown. Our Luna is with child." The world stopped. The words landed not as a sound, but as a physical sensation, a great warm golden wave that washed through my entire being. My hand flew to my stomach. A child, our child, the final impossible seal on a happiness I had never dared to dream of. I looked at Kristoff. His face, a moment ago a mask of fear, underwent a transformation so complete it stole my breath. The Alpha King, the fierce warrior, the strategic mind, all of it fell away, leaving behind a man so filled with awe and love that he seemed to glow. He crossed the room in 2 strides and fell to his knees before my chair, his large, capable hands coming to rest gently over mine on my stomach. His ice-blue eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, met mine. "A pup?" he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. I could only nod, tears streaming down my own face. The bond between us exploded with a joy so pure, so fierce that it was almost painful. It was the joy of a future secured, of a love made manifest, of a lineage that would carry our united strength forward. The news spread through the pack like wildfire, and the celebration that erupted dwarfed even the victory feast after Serpent's Pass. The pack's joy was a tangible force, a wave of love and excitement that buoyed me up. I was their Luna, and I was carrying their future. The following months were a time of profound and gentle transformation. My body changed, and with it, my connection to everything around me deepened. The bond with Kristoff, already a fortress, became a sanctuary. He was endlessly attentive, his hand always finding the small of my back, his mind constantly brushing against mine with questions of comfort and well-being. But the most astonishing change was in my gift. It had always been about sensing and healing others. Now it turned inward, becoming a deep, intuitive conversation with the new life growing within me. I could feel the flicker of a tiny, bright consciousness, a spark of pure potential that was both Kristoff and me, and yet entirely its own thing. I would send waves of love and safety toward it, and in return, I would feel a contented, sleepy warmth. One evening, as we sat by the fire, Kristoff's hand resting on my rounded belly, he felt it too, a gentle, fluttering kick. His breath hitched, and he looked at me, his eyes wide with wonder. "He's strong," he murmured. "She," I corrected softly, a smile touching my lips. I didn't know how I knew, but I was certain. I could feel her essence, a fierce, bright light like a winter star. Kristoff's smile was blinding. "A daughter," he breathed, as if it were the most miraculous word in any language. "Our little princess." The future, once an abstract concept of peace and duty, now had a face. It was the face of our daughter, a child born of a love that had overcome blizzards, curses, and war. She was the living proof that the past held no power over us, that every sorrow had been a stepping stone to this moment. As I felt her move within me, a tiny dancer in the sacred space between my soul and Kristoff's, I knew that our greatest adventure was not behind us. It was just beginning. and we would face it as we had faced everything else, together. The deep winter returned, but the cold could not touch the warmth that filled the great lodge. The air was thick with the scent of pine and baking bread, and the entire pack moved with a hushed, joyful anticipation. The time was near. I stood at the window of our chambers, my hands resting on the impossible, beautiful curve of my stomach, watching the first snowflakes of a new blizzard begin to fall. They danced and swirled, a silent white ballet that reminded me of another storm, another lifetime ago, when 12 wolves had scratched at my door. Kristoff came up behind me, his arms encircling me, his hands joining mine. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his presence a solid wall of love and strength. "It reminds you of that night, doesn't it?" he murmured, his voice a soft vibration against my back. Everything began that night. The loneliness ended that night. He turned me gently in his arms, his ice-blue eyes soft in the firelight. "Our story began long before that, my love. It was written in the stars. The blizzard was just the page we finally opened." A sudden deep ache bloomed in my back, radiating around to my front. This was different from the usual discomfort. This was a purposeful, powerful tightening. I gasped, my fingers digging into his arms. Kristoff's eyes widened, then filled with a calm, steady certainty. "It's time," he said, his voice impossibly gentle. The next hours were a blur of focused activity and surreal calm. Maeve and Sterling were summoned. The elite guard took up their silent, watchful positions outside our door. Kristoff never left my side. He was my anchor, his hand in mine, his voice a low, steady stream of encouragement as the waves of pressure built and receded. I surrendered to the process, to the ancient, powerful magic of creation. My gift, which had always flowed outward, was now turned entirely inward, a brilliant, guiding light leading our daughter into the world. I could feel her eagerness, her perfect, tiny strength, and the profound, sacred rightness of this moment. And then, with a final, triumphant surge of effort, she was there. A tiny, indignant cry pierced the air, a sound more beautiful than any music. Sterling placed her on my chest, and the world narrowed to this one perfect being. She was so small, her skin flushed and new, and nestled in a cap of hair as pale and fine as moonlit snow. Her eyes, when they opened, were the exact shade of Kristoff's ice blue. Tears streamed down my face unchecked. I looked up at Kristoff. He was weeping openly, his hand trembling as he reached out to gently stroke our daughter's cheek. The love that poured from him through our bond was a force of nature, so vast and powerful it felt like it could reshape the mountains. "Our daughter," he breathed, his voice thick with awe. "Alina," I said. The name came to me then, as Lycos's had, a gift from the quiet knowing in my soul. It meant light. "Alina," Kristoff repeated, as if tasting the sweetness of the word. He bent and kissed her forehead, then mine. "My beautiful, brave Alara, you have given me everything." We were given time, just the three of us, as the blizzard whispered against the windows. We were a universe contained in a single room, a new family bound by a love that had been prophesized, tested, and ultimately triumphant. Later, when the pack was allowed in to meet their new princess, the joy was a palpable, radiant thing. Maeve wept tears of joy, declaring Alina the living embodiment of the pack's bright future. The elite guard, these fierce warriors, looked upon the tiny bundle with a softness in their eyes that made my heart ache with love for them all. As the celebrations continued in the hall below, Kristoff and I sat together by the fire, Alina sleeping peacefully in my arms. The storm outside was a gentle echo of the one that had brought us together, a reminder of how far we had come. My mother's prophecy is complete, Kristoff said softly, his gaze fixed on our daughter. She said the pale Omega would save me when I was at my weakest, and that she would be the only one who could complete my soul. He looked at me, his love an unbreakable vow. You have, and you have given us our future. I looked down at Alina, at her perfect, peaceful face, and I knew that my own story of accursed Omega was finally, truly over. It had not been a curse, but a journey, a long winter road that had led me home. I was Alara, the Silver Luna, the true mate of the Alpha King. I was a healer, a queen, and now a mother. The little girl who had been told she was Death's bride had become life's greatest champion. The blizzard had passed, the war was won, and in the quiet heart of the winter, surrounded by the love of my pack and my family, a new light had dawned. Our story would be told for generations, a tale of how love could heal the deepest wounds, how hope could be found in the fiercest storm, and how the most beautiful destinies are often born from the darkest nights. And as I held my daughter, my mate's hand in mine, I knew with a certainty that would last forever. The greatest magic was not in prophecies or gifts, but in the simple, enduring power of a love that had chosen to scratch at the door and had been brave enough to open it. If you were swept away by the story of Alara and Kristoff, if you felt the chill of the blizzard and the warmth of their bond, then please help our channel grow. Like this video to let us know you want more stories like this. Subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new upload into worlds of fantasy and romance. And most importantly, leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought of the Silver Luna's journey. Should we create a part 2 to follow the next chapter for Alina, the Winter Princess? Your feedback and requests shape the stories we tell next. Thank you for watching and for being a part of our pack. Until the next story.